It's a wonderful opportunity that the World Justice Project has provided to all of us, along with the contributions of many of our partners. Bill, we appreciate your inspiring welcome and introduction and description of our activities this week together. It does promise to be the most successful World Justice Forum that we have had to date. I am William Hubbard, Chair of the Board of the World Justice Project, and it is my honor to introduce the afternoon's program. The theme of the World Justice Forum is Realizing Justice for All. As we prepare for the first Sustainable Development Goals Summit in September, our challenge is to work together as a community to mobilize commitments to increase access to justice. In the opening session of the forum, we launched the report of the Task Force on Justice, which has brought together ministers, justice leaders, and many of the partners in this room. The task force presents the first estimate of the scale of the global justice gap. It has developed a case for investment in justice and brought together the evidence of what works to tackle injustice and provide people with quality justice services. Its vision is for a shift from a model that provides justice only for the few to one that delivers measurable improvements in justice for all. Can we really rally the commitments needed to make this shift? The task is certainly a massive and challenging one. You heard from Bill Newcomb, founder of the World Justice Project, which was one of the task force's key partners, speak of the 5 billion people who have unmet justice needs. Such big numbers can seem overwhelming, but the task force presents a credible roadmap for beginning to close this immense justice gap. We are lucky to have with us here today 2 of the co-chairs of the Task Force on Justice to highlight the key findings from the report and to inspire us with their call to action. Minister Priscilla Schwartz of Sierra Leone and Hina Jilani of the Elders. I will introduce them before they speak. But first, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Birgitta Tazelaar of the Netherlands Minister of Foreign Affairs. She is speaking on behalf of Minister Kang, Minister for Foreign Trade and International Development of the Netherlands, who is also a co-chair of the task force. The Netherlands has shown impressive leadership in the area of access to justice, and Minister Kang led a ministerial dialogue on justice for all just a few months ago here in The Hague. Ms. Tazelaar.
Well, good afternoon, and also on my behalf and on behalf of Minister Kaag, obviously, a big welcome to our host, World Justice Project, to Mr. Hubbard, the chairman of the board, and Mr. Newcomb, the CEO and founder of the World Justice Project. A special welcome to our co-chairs of the task force, Her Excellency Minister Schwartz from Sierra Leone, and of course Hina Jilani from the Elders, and the esteemed representative from Argentina. It's really a great pleasure to be here today and to see such a diverse group, including leaders of the world of politics, business, civil society, and research. All of you are necessary if we want to make access to justice for all by 2030 a reality. In order to realize the 2030 agenda, and particularly SDG 16.3, the most ambitious of them all, we will need each other. Without access to justice, many people will continue to suffer from exclusion, from key opportunities to shape their lives, and from safe, healthy places to live and work. Because of our commitment to access to justice, the Netherlands joined the International Task Force on Justice with Sierra Leone, Argentina, and the Elders. And we're proud to launch the report of the task force today in the presence of our esteemed co-chairs. I want to thank all of those who contributed to the task force report, in particular the Center for International Cooperation, that, as a secretariat of the task force, played a crucial role in assembling the report. The report is groundbreaking in a number of ways. First of all, we now better understand the global justice gap. The report states that at least 253 million people are excluded from opportunities to seek justice, either because they are slaves, stateless, or live in insecure conditions. It also states that 1.5 billion people cannot resolve their justice problems, and that 4.5 billion people are excluded from the opportunities the law provides to secure their rights. Altogether, 5 billion people, and I'm the third one to say today, but I'm sure I will not be the last one, 5 billion people have unmet legal needs. This is a universal challenge which concerns all countries. Also in the Netherlands, challenges remain when it comes to problem resolution and accessibility to justice. In order to bring justice closer to the people, we experiment, for example, with community courts in some of our bigger cities. The report makes a strong case for the benefits of investing in justice. With smarter, relatively small investments, such as $20 per person worth of basic justice services in low-income countries, a significant difference could be made. The report also illustrates the costs of inaction. For example, lost income, damaged health, and cost of seeking redress may cost OECD countries between 0.5 and 3% GDP. In low-income countries, everyday justice problems cost more than 2% of GDP. So what should be our response in the light of these findings? Here again, the report provides us with crucial insights on how we can begin to address these issues. Justice needs are about people, and we should keep the focus on them if we want to resolve their needs. I see empty chairs here, and I imagine that this is where our clients are seated. Maybe they should remain empty for the rest of our dealings here so that we keep on thinking about those empty chairs, because that's where the people are that we're talking about today. Justice needs are about people. Oh yeah, I said that. First of all, we need to understand the kind of needs that people have and the kinds of justice journeys that they face. This is about data and it's about evidence. An example, half of women feel it is pointless to report a case of sexual harassment to the police. Data like this highlights a specific problem that needs to be resolved. Only then we can move towards solutions by offering justice services that are responsive to their needs, which is the second thing that we should do. And this requires, in many cases, finding solutions outside the confines of the courtroom. Third, it requires innovation and creativity. Innovations like the prize-winning Crime Sync from Sierra Leone, which made an all-in-one digital application for crime records, and which has been launched across the country's prison system. It serves to improve the efficiency and transparency of the justice system. Creativity is also required in addressing issues of financing and resources. Partnerships are needed, for example, with the private sector that is well represented here. And I'm proud of the way the task force and this forum fostered these partnerships. And looking around the room today, I can see that a movement is forming to keep access to justice high on the international agenda. In February, Minister Kaag hosted 20 ministers from abroad and other leaders on justice to this end. The adoption of the The Hague Declaration on Equal Access to Justice for All by 2030 is an important tool to further consolidate the movement. The SDG framework provides us with the opportunity to attach a time frame to reaching concrete results on the ground in improving access to justice. In the first instance, it will be important to show concrete commitments at the review of the SDG 16 during the high-level political forum, but also at the SDG summit in September. I commend the World Justice Project for providing the space for these commitments. It's encouraging to see the commitment on justice at the forum's website. As the Netherlands, we have already made a concrete commitment, which is to double our target of those who will obtain access to justice through our development assistance by 2020, and half of them will be women. Countries can also inspire and learn from each other. I want to thank the leadership of Sierra Leone and Argentina in this regard. Our work will not stop at the high-level political forum or the SDG summit. As the Netherlands, we are committed to support these efforts even after the HLPF, and we look forward to continued cooperation with all of you. I hope you have a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tazelaar, for the commitment of the Netherlands and also for your laying down a fresh challenge for us. We now turn to Minister Schwartz, who joined with Minister Kong and Minister Garavano of Argentina as the ministerial co-chairs of the task force. Minister Priscilla Schwartz is the first woman in the history of Sierra Leone to serve as Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Her president, Julius Maado Bio, used a speech in New York last year to call on his fellow heads of state to make justice a priority. Minister Schwartz.
Thank you very much, William. Good afternoon, everyone. I bring you greetings from Sierra Leone, the land that is betwixt the plains, the mountains, and the seas. And in between that, very fine people who appreciate what you're doing here today and send their regards. I want to thank the organizers of this occasion, especially the World Justice Project and other supporting partners, but I also want to commend my co-chairs, the ministers, Minister Karg, represented by Birgitta, for working on this project to this point, but also recognize the Netherlands government for hosting our Records of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission from Sierra Leone here. I extend my gratitude as the Minister of Justice for my country. I recognize Minister Garavano of Argentina, he's not here. I also recognize the elder Hina, Jilani, and all task force members for the work that you have done. I am delighted to be part of this latest important stage in the task force's journey in delivering access to justice for all. Sierra Leone has dealt with more than its fair share of injustice over the past years. But as we also, I believe, we in Sierra Leone are an example of how injustice can be overcome and how justice reforms can deliver transformative improvements in people's lives. As my colleague Birgitta has explained, the majority of people's justice problems remain unsolved. To close the justice gap, we need to step up our ambition for justice systems. For too long, including in my country, justice systems have delivered justice only for the few, usually the wealthy and the powerful. As we saw in Sierra Leone, this unfairness can lead to tremendous resentment among the people, and this resentment can eventually explode into terrible violence. To prevent this happening, we need to create justice systems that deliver justice for all. And this requires radical action. Many of the people who have justice problems do not live in capital cities where all the courthouses, judges, and lawyers tend to be located. They don't have the money to pay for expensive lawyers, or they are put off by the fusty corridors, the intimidating wigs and gowns, and incomprehensible language that are typical of formal justice institutions. Or sometimes, they simply do not know that the problem they are facing is a justice problem, or they don't know which of many possible routes is the best one for solving their justice problems. As the task force report clearly shows, a people-centered approach to justice is the only way we can close the justice gap. A people-centered system considers people's justice journeys. It starts by empowering people and communities to recognize when a justice problem has arisen and to take action to tackle it. It makes services available to them that are responsive to their needs, that are speedy and efficient, and that are welcoming rather than intimidating. And these services, I dare say, may not be what we traditionally think of when we think about the law, but may include things like community dispute resolution mechanisms, telephone or internet advice services, or one-stop shops that provide health and care justice services, for example, under one roof. And it focuses on delivering fair outcomes that meet international human rights standards, that give victims a say in how perpetrators are brought to justice, and that are seen to be transparent and independent from external interferences. Beyond all this, ladies and gentlemen, we also need to begin to focus more strongly on preventing injustice rather than reacting only after an injustice has occurred. This preventative approach gets to the roots of justice problems. The justice gap is too big for firefighting. If we really want to close it, we're going to have to stop injustice from happening in the first place, or at least to nip problems in the bud before they become too serious. We have good examples of injustice prevention in Sierra Leone. We have gone from a devastating civil war to a peaceful and functioning democracy, and we have defied many observers' predictions that we will descend into conflict again. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we set up after the war has been instrumental in helping prevent a recurrence, bringing the worst offenders to justice, and helping communities to identify grievances that led to the violence and to come together and develop strategies to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And as well as dealing with the after effects of the war, we are also using justice as a tool for economic development. We have set up a fast-track commercial court to protect investors in our country, for example, and we have worked to provide a more reliable business environment by making the selection of judges transparent and merit-based. But it's not just about what the government has done to prevent injustice. Paralegals on the ground in remote parts of the country are preventing injustice by representing communities against powerful business interests that are encroaching on their land or destroying their environments. And by helping detainees to represent themselves in court, they have drastically reduced the number of detainees held without trial. Prevention is about addressing the structural injustices that ruin lives and impede social and economic development. It requires working collaboratively with other sectors and with civil society, the media, business, and communities themselves to avert human rights abuses and disputes that lead to violence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to commend this report to you. And I want to urge you to read it. Consider its messages. The Task Force on Justice strongly believes that justice for all is a realistic goal, and our report sets out our vision for how justice systems can be transformed to deliver it. Perhaps our most important message is that justice systems need to turn their focus towards the people they are meant to serve. By understanding their needs and designing institutions and processes that are responsive to those needs, justice actors can deliver dramatic improvements in people's lives and, as has happened in Sierra Leone, provide a major boost to their country's social and economic development. I thank you all.
Minister Schwartz, thank you very much for refocusing our attention on the fact that justice needs to be focused on the people, and also for inspiring us to consider the importance of collaboration and innovation as we seek to close the justice gap. Hina Jilani is one of the elders and also co-chair of the task force. Ms. Jilani has spent her life fighting for justice as the founder of Pakistan's first all-women law firm and its first legal aid center. As an advocate of the Supreme Court and as an international campaigner for justice for all. The elders, inspired by Nelson Mandela's life and legacy, have made access to justice a new priority for their global leadership. Ms. Jilani.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you here today for the launch of this landmark report on justice, to which I have had the privilege to contribute as a co-chair of the task force. I thank the governments of Argentina, Sierra Leone, and the Netherlands for their support of this initiative, and my co-chairs, Minister Garavano, Dr. Schwartz, and Minister Sigrid Kaag, for the commitment with which they have taken this initiative forward on behalf of their governments. As has just been said, the elders, a group of global leaders brought together by Nelson Mandela, of which I am a part, launched an Access to Justice program in February, adding our voice and leadership to stand alongside those who pioneer access to justice both at the global and local levels. My colleague, Dr. Schwartz, has alluded to the multiplicity of possible actors in a justice system. These include not only former justice services, but also civil society, the private sector, international donors, community elders, religious leaders, and others. Internationally, nationally, and locally, there is a panoply of people and organizations involved in some way in providing justice. Quite often, however, these actors worked completely independently of each other, with little knowledge of what others are doing, and therefore without a cohesive strategy for delivering what matters most to people. It is no easy task to bring all these actors together into a focused and coherent effort to target and solve the problems that matter most to people. One non-traditional provider that I believe has been underappreciated as a partner in delivering justice goals is the civil society. The elders have a strong belief in engaging with and enlisting the support of civil society in expanding access to justice, and the task force report also underlines the importance of this. People cannot always navigate complex legal problems and systems by themselves, and they can't always afford lawyers to help them navigate these systems. Civil society actors, as advocacy groups or as community support groups such as paralegals, help fulfill that gap. They advise citizens where they can access support and help them to find timely, practical solutions to their problems that don't require them to fall into debt or into poverty traps. Civil society also has a role in drawing attention to the structural injustices that damage entire communities, and is a powerful source of advocacy in holding governments and businesses to account for injustice. My experiences as a human rights lawyer providing assistance to people for a range of difficulties they confront in realizing their rights through the justice system compel me to call attention to some areas that have received less attention in discussions on the SDG 16, but remain central to people's grievances in many parts of the world, including my own. It is in people's struggle to acquire the right to a safe environment, to control over their own natural resources, and to labor practices free of exploitation that the justice gaps become ever so visible. Labor tribunals have given little attention to the right to freedom of association and unionization, or to ensuring fair wages for women workers. Land tenancy laws still lack sufficient safeguards and mechanisms of redress against eviction of the landless peasants who till the land, and mechanisms for safeguarding the right of people to control or retain an equitable share in their natural resources are non-existent or dysfunctional. These are some of the structural injustices that the task force report highlights for our attention. I must stop for a minute here, ladies and gentlemen, to note with a great deal of pleasure the presence in this hall today of Justice Tazelaar Jilani, former Chief Justice of Pakistan. Many of his judgments have given real justice to women, to minorities, to the poorer sections of Pakistan's population. He received a very well-deserved award only a few weeks ago here in The Hague for his judgments to promote human rights and for his other work with justice sector defenders in Pakistan and elsewhere. Thank you, Justice Jilani, for being here today. I must emphasize that it is the civil society actors, be they social activists, human rights defenders, or journalists, who bring issues to the forefront and indicate the areas in which action is most needed by governments. For civil society to fulfill its potential, it needs recognition by the legal system as well. It needs financial support through mechanisms such as legal aid, while at the same time preserving the independence from state interference. Above all, civil society members and activists need physical protection from the powerful interests they oppose in their struggle to get justice for the most vulnerable. I often refer to the example of Indonesia, which has been a pioneer in this area. The country's national legal aid law system, adopted in 2011, recognizes the central role of paralegals and legal aid offices in providing justice. It also provides public funding to build the capacity of civil society organizations. Indonesia now has up to 6,000 grassroots justice defenders working to empower local communities. The task force report emphasizes and illustrates with examples from different countries how impactful investment in justice can be. The elders also believe strongly that investment in access to justice should be evidence-based. We therefore need data to tell us where people's justice problems lie, so that efforts can be targeted at the most important problems and tailored to those groups that are most in need. The World Justice Project's estimate of the global justice gap is an excellent example of this, and one that should be built upon and repeated as we move towards 2030. I appeal to governments around the world to take action to support civil society as a critical measure to maximize their ability to deliver justice to all those who need it. More broadly, in commending to you this excellent report, I call on governments to bring together the range of actors in the justice ecosystems to make 2019 the year in which we are able to demonstrate that this is indeed a goal actually attainable. There are challenges, of course, but to quote Mary Robinson, chair of the elders, from her op-ed in The Independent today, the fix is easier than you think. Thank you.
Ms. Jilani, thank you very much, not only for your leadership on the task force, but for your sustained leadership for Justice for All over your entire life. At this time, we would like to mark this occasion, the launch of the report of the Task Force on Justice, with a photograph of the two co-chairs and representatives of the Netherlands and Argentina. So I would like to invite all of you to come up on the stage at this time. Madam Attorney General and Ms. Jilani, I welcome you to move to the seats here on stage and invite the rest of our distinguished panel to join you. In a moment, we'll be handing over the rest of the session to the able moderation of Maria Katawi, World Justice Project Honorary Chair and former Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. Joining Ms. Katawi will be Asako Akai, Assistant Administrator of UNDP, Nicola Bonucci, Director of Legal Affairs, OECD, and Walter Flores, Director of the Center for the Study of Equality and Governance in Health Systems in Guatemala.
Thank you very
Ms.
much.
Katawi.
Oh, yes. One of these is your pen. Good afternoon to everyone. Following those inspiring statements, we have a hard task in front of us. And I'd like to welcome, first of all, the panelists with us. We start Asako Kai, who's the Assistant Administrator from the UNDP, Nicola Bonucci, who's the head of the Legal Directorate at the OECD, Walter Flores from Guatemala, a community leader, among many other things, and researcher. And of course, you've already been introduced to Dr. Priscilla Schwartz and Hina Jilani. So we all heard very, very clearly, I think, now that the Justice for All report of the Task Force on Justice, which I think merits all the members of it our highest thanks, is a landmark study, and it sets a sort of roadmap for us in order to achieve its goals. Now, our panel here today is going to focus on how we can get there, some of the ways in which we can actually achieve those goals. And we will be looking, and I hope we'll hear from them, some of their experiences, the experiments, basic principles and proposals that they can bring to this. While we do so, we'll have it in the form of a conversation generally on a conversation among and between us. There are three overall questions, however, that I do ask you if you could keep in the back of your mind as a backdrop, if you wish, to the more specific ones that we may discuss. The first of these is, what exactly do you think are the most important shifts and changes that are needed to the systems themselves to achieve people-centered justice for all of them? Second, how can all justice actors and groups, whether they're private or academic, non-governmental, civil society, Hina, be recognized as real partners of justice systems to achieve these goals that we're setting out? How can we make sure that they're not marginal, but real partners? And third, the report calls for credible and ambitious contributions to achieve the goals by 2030. Given the history of past systemic change, how do you see this being done in the next 12 years? Not impossible, but how can we make it a priority to get there in 12 years? So let's start. By the way, you will have noticed that the initial part of our speakers, there was a most welcomed gender imbalance. So actually, I will start with one of our panelists in the minority. Nicola. The OECD, you and the OECD and your colleagues there have been working quite a lot on this subject. And you take it very often from another angle, which is an economic one, economic impact. I'd very much like to ask you how you see the white paper and the other documents that you're producing, I think in collaboration with the World Justice Project, how you do that, how you look at the people-centered justice having a strong economic impact as well. I noted that you have mentioned before that the inability to access justice can lead to reduced access also to economic opportunity, to things like education and employment as well. There's so many unresolved problems that prevent people, prevent businesses, prevent society in general from reaching their potential. Perhaps you could give us some idea of some of the common barriers or some of the background of how you see this effort at OECD and what you're actually doing about it.
Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon, everybody. For first, thank you for giving the floor to the minority, the vulnerable group that we represent here. Actually, with my name, I receive at least 3 messages per day with Mrs. Nicola Bonucci, so I'm used to feel what a woman can feel in some cases. I would maybe start by explaining why the OECD started to work on these issues, indeed. And we did that with 3 ideas and 3 main reasons. The first one is that the OECD has been working for now more than 20 years on good governance. And there is a clear relationship between good governance, good regulatory practice, and effective justice. One of the problems that we face within an effective justice system go much beyond the justice system itself is, in fact, the fact that you have a legal system, you have a regulatory system, which is either very complicated, very obscure, not facilitating the life of everybody, except maybe a few people who can navigate in that, and some of the speeches have already mentioned this. The second reason you pointed out is we are an economic organization. We also always look at the issue from an economic angle. The data that was shared this afternoon by the distinguished representative of the Netherlands comes indeed from this white paper which has been published with the World Justice Project, and I would like to pay tribute to the World Justice Project for this collaboration. And the paper indicates that based on our calculation, the annual cost of legal problems ranges from 0.5 to 3% of most of the countries, irrespective if they are OECD or non-OECD.
Percent of what, the GDP?
GDP.
The GDP.
This is huge. Those are huge numbers. Yeah. And this is a conservative figure. When you look at it from the business point of view, and you transpose the notion of vulnerability that exists for a physical person to business, the vulnerable in the business community are the small and medium enterprises. Yeah. Again, SMEs, even in OECD countries, represent between 95 and 98% of the business. So, what is true for the natural person, which is that the system benefits at the end of the day only a few big and powerful, can be transposed very much to the world of business. And the third reason is the very purpose of this panel and the very purpose of this conference. Our motto is better policies for better lives. So what we are trying to do here is to also recast the system and recast the thinking about the people, indeed. Those legal systems have been put in place through, I would say, a system of layers, but with something which has always been the consistent. They're always very often been put as a top-down approach.
Yes.
In centuries, one after the other, in different ways and means, but very much top-down. I think it's time, we think it's time to come back to a more bottom-up or putting the individual in the center and expanding it from it. And I would like to give 2 ways in which this can be done. The first one is, for doing that, we have to know what are the needs of the people. And we have to know what are the needs of the people based on what the people tell us, not what we think are the needs of the people. So we have developed systems of legal needs surveys, and we have published a report with the Open Society Justice Initiative, a guide on legal needs survey and access to justice. And what this report shows is that there is a mismatch between what are the needs of the people and what the justice system's responses are. There is overcapacity in some areas, there is undercapacity in the areas in which the people have the most needs. So, and I will finish with my promotion of OECD project and product. We have developed another report called Equal Access to Justice for Inclusive Growth, Putting People at the Center, which aims to provide countries with tools and frameworks to ensure the justice chain and services are responsive to the people need. Because once you have assessed what the people needs are, it's nice, but it's not enough. You then try to provide a response. I'm a terrible handyman, okay? I don't know anything. But I know that a good handyman has a good toolbox. What is a good toolbox? It's a toolbox which has different tools for different purposes and each other supporting the other tools. I don't need to have 10 times the same tool in my toolbox. But I need to have different screwdrivers. I need to have different, I don't even know the terms. That shows how terrible I am. We need to have different tools which are complementary one to each other. And we need to give to the people the free choice to use the tool that they feel it's better equipped and better addressing the needs. So, I know we need to be short and conversational. So to finish with my first intervention, I was very struck in reading the report of the Task Force on Justice on the Chapter 6, the agenda for action. I think this is a wonderful roadmap, which is very complementary indeed with the various products and the various reports that I mentioned. The goal, the task of this conference, but beyond that, of the SDGs and of the international community, is indeed to translate this Chapter 6 agenda for action into action.
Into action. Mm-hmm.
Action which means justice of the people, justice by the people, and justice for the people.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I know that you've been very practical in a lot of these reports, and I think we'll come back to it. Several of you have worked in this area. Legal problems that are sometimes, shall we say, very immediate in everyday lives, family, land, employment, community. But I also noticed in some of your reports, and I'd like us to address this a little bit, that there are lots of barriers to achieving this. Yes, there's a toolbox, but there's also the toolbox at the other side that we have to worry about.
I'm not saying there is a toolbox what I'm saying is that there is a need for a toolbox.
Well,
for the moment, we have
make one,
a very limited toolbox and a very duplicative toolbox.
Well, we're going to discuss some of the other tools that perhaps some of you are evolving, and I'll come back to you, Priscilla, because you have some very interesting work that you're actually engaged in now in Sierra Leone to develop some of these tools. At the same time that we're developing all the positive, keep in mind that some of the common barriers like cost, time, confusion, disorientation, badly put together, ordinary regulatory barriers that you mentioned are key here. And these also need to be addressed. And how you do it, I look forward to hearing from you. But just before, the SDGs have been evoked several times this afternoon, particularly 16.3, which is most relevant to this work. UNDP is, I understand, developing some form of tracking what is being done to achieve SDG 16.3. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit, Sako, how you're getting there, what you're doing at the UNDP in this regard.
Sure, thank you, Maria. I'm very pleased to be participating in this wonderful panel. As you have rightly pointed out, the people-centered approach is at the core of SDGs, and everything we do in SDGs, which frames the work of UNDP, is people-centered. people-centered. So I'm so happy to see this wonderful report coming out with a people-centered focus on this. And we also think that the SDG 16 is at the heart of the whole of the other SDG goals. We consider this as an enabler, accelerator, and then this will be a focus at the high-level political forum this year. For the first time for the SDG 16, it will provide a wonderful opportunity to showcase that. And then for the UNDP, we are co-hosting the Global Alliance of the reporting to the peace and the justice and the inclusivity together with the civil society, private sector, think tank, and etc. And we are now currently developing a report, SDG 16 Plus report. This is to gather all the lessons learned, what are the barriers faced by individual countries, what can we learn from there. So there will be the work going on currently in about 20 to 30 countries. I'm sure that many of are part of it. I'm sure the Sierra Leone is working on this too. So we very much look forward to having that report ready by July so that we can use this as a guide to learn from the experiences. And then also this is supported by our program as well. We consider some of the capacity building, the institutional reforms, or the access to justice, the people-centered policing, all that transitional justice, for instance. There will be a lot of the programs with us jointly, sometimes conducted with other the agencies. So we are actually having program in nearly 40-some countries, and our budget annually is like 40 to 60 million US dollars per year, depends on the funding. By the way, the Netherlands is funding the SDG 16 Plus report. Thank you very much, the Netherlands, for contributing to this important work. So like this, we would like to showcase that how important the justice, this Goal 16 as a whole, is important in SDG implementation. I just had this morning the discussion with the delegation of Uzbekistan, who had chosen justice, governance, and rule of law as the accelerator for the whole country's development. And then for the last 2 years, they've been working on the justice sector and the e-court accelerating process with ICTs. And then with this, so much efficiency has been gained and brought the government and the citizens closer together. And I'm happy to hear from them that they are one of the nominees for World Just Challenges, and their booth is out there. But this is exactly kind of the linkages we see with SDG 16 and rest of the SDG goals. So I would stop there. I would be able to provide you many examples of the other countries later on, but...
No, very much welcome, because this is, I think, all contributing to what you call developing the toolbox, is also finding out what, and putting together in such a study what countries are really embarked on, what changes, as I asked before, what precise changes they are involved in. One of the major tools in this toolbox, and please come in, anyone who has examples at any time. Asako, please just let me know when you would like to add some of your examples. But one of them, of course, is community-based, which we have talked a great deal about among ourselves also. And Walter Flores is the director for the Center for the Study of Equality and Governance, particularly in health systems. But one of the major areas that you're working on, Walter, is actually a broad strategy of justice that includes communities. This is exactly, Nicola, what you refer to. This is a bottom-up approach from communities, paralegals, and so on. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what this tool, how this partnership would work out in delivering justice for all.
Yeah. Great, thank you. First, I think it's very important that the report talks of people-led justice. For me, for my organization, it's very important because we work with the indigenous population. And if we look at the whole picture worldwide, there is 370 million of indigenous people over 90 countries that all of them face very similar issues and challenges. For instance, I also commend the report very much that they made the emphasis on access to justice rather than access to law. Because we must be aware that accessing law is not the same accessing justice. Because for indigenous population, the reason, the cause of the level of destitution, poverty, exclusion that they face is actually legal systems. So asking for access to justice is very important for the indigenous population. But also we must take into account that the report says that and provide estimates to improve access to basic justice, which I think is correct. It's important. We should start with what is the basic needed. And I think it is important. But we must be aware that for the most marginalized people, for the most left behind, they do face gaps in terms of basic justice, but also they face historical structural gaps. For instance, again, for indigenous populations, they face pollution to the land and the water because of extractive industries in many countries. They also face the effects of climate change, which of course they are the least one contributing to the man-made effects of climate change. And also they continue having threats from their ancestral lands. If you see all of these challenges, all of these injustices have nothing to do with basic justice, but has to do with the structural, economic, social, and political order that we have. So if we want to achieve justice for those most left behind, we need to be aware that in addition to the basic justice, we need to continue tackling the structural injustice at the national and international level. So I do commend that we're going to concentrate on the basic justice, but we must not forget that we still need structural justice. And finally, which is very important to your question, is who should champion this change? Logically, we may think that it should be the judiciary systems in the countries. But unfortunately, in most countries, the judiciary systems are the gatekeepers of the status quo. So we will need to find the champions within those judicial systems, and those champions need to have a lot of support from other government institutions, but I think most importantly, the support of those communities that are directly affected by injustice. So I would say that a natural ally of progressive judiciary system actors should be those communities that are actually affecting that, the ones that have the greatest interest to improve justice. So that comes center to the purpose of community-based systems, or paralegals or community defenders, because they can actually close the gap in terms of structural changes, but also changes at the very community level, at the very bottom in which the most affected population live.
Walter, thank you for bringing up the, I think, obvious, now it seems, of course, obvious to us all that law and justice for all is not exactly the same thing, systems of law and justice for all. I bring to note to you, in support of what Hina has mentioned, yourself, Walter, and certainly Priscilla in the work you're doing, that it's pretty scary for many people in all of our countries to be faced. They don't want necessarily to interact with justice systems. This is not, if they would prefer not to have to. And this brings up very often the question of, yes, do we have community ideas, community law, traditional forms of traditional law, customary law, if you wish, customary ways of doing things, paralegals, and Hina, as you have mentioned many times, all groups in civil society. There's even in the report a question or a proposal of some kind that governments perhaps should recognize. I mean, this is something we can discuss. Governments should recognize the value in some way of all of these other tools, of these other avenues towards justice. Should they also support them? Or is that going too far?
I think they should support them. I think they should support them. Nevertheless, knowing the mindset of most governments around the world, they want to control everything. Yeah. So as long as they don't interfere or have any kind of intrusive methodologies of cooperation with civil society efforts to bring justice to all, I think this is the most deserving sector for public funding. Nevertheless, I just want to take forward something that Walter has raised on the whole concept of people's relationship to laws. What we have come to understand as the rule of law is really rule by law. In many parts of the world, and many of us over here come from such countries, laws have become the instrument of repression themselves. So while I do believe that legislation alone is not an instrument of change, and there have to be many actors involved in bringing about that change, law becomes the first tool in our hands. As a human rights lawyer, again, I know the value of where law exists. It makes things much easier for us. Nevertheless, when I say law alone doesn't bring about the change, you know, there is no ideal system and we must prepare ourselves that what we are looking for is a system that has the cumulative impact through the energy and the work of different actors to deliver justice, you know, in a joint way. For instance, if the law is flawed, then judiciaries need to be sensitive to the fact that there is vulnerability in communities and in individuals, and their interpretation of the law must help mitigate the effect of those flaws in the law. I also think that as a human rights defender and a women's rights defender in particular, I have women sitting in front of me, bringing problems to me where actually in the legal framework, there is nothing I can do to help them. Yet I can't tell those women, you know, sister, you wait till we are able to bring social change. We have to deliver. So we find whatever methods we can to do this. And in Pakistan's darker days in the past, we have, despite extremely repressive and ill-imagined laws, been able to get people real redress at times. So again, as I said, the reason we mention this fact of different actors being a part of the justice ecosystem, and the trick is to bring them together in a way where if there is a gap in one place, others have the capacity, the skill, and the knowledge to mitigate the damage of those gaps by some other action that they do.
Hina and Walter, I'm going to ask Priscilla to pick up on this. When I put the question, how does one actually recognize the value? Is it a formal recognition of these other ways of getting there? Is it an informal? Is it a combination? I know that you're working exactly in this area of how you take a multitude right across your entire country of different kinds of justice delivery, if you wish, of mitigating and preventing of conflict and so on. How are you going about it, and how do you propose to address the problem of whether you recognize it formally, support it financially? How are you going to do this?
Thank you very much, Maria. I'll give you a context first so that at least there's an understanding around what I'm going to
Hold
say.
the microphone close.
In the context of extractives that you mentioned, in my country, the investor gets a license to mine at the state level. And then he's supposed to go to the mines, the land, to obtain a lease from the chiefs and the local people. Government stops at the license giving, and that's it. The investor goes to a different system, makes a different arrangement with the tribal people, the local communities, and so on and so forth. And in the context of us looking at the agreements in the Law Officers Department, which is the government powerhouse for doing law, all we look at is government's interest in that agreement. I mean, this is the structural issue. We look at government's interest, the investor's interest in that agreement. Maybe at some stage in the environmental protection impact assessment, they will think about the social issues that go down there. I and my justice mechanism am not involved in that. They go down there, they meet with the locals, there's a conflict because they need grazing rights, they need water rights, they need employment, they need land rights. We are not there, but we are the government. Okay, the civil society comes in. They go there to advocate, but that's all they can do. Advocate, these people have rights, give them rights. So this, what I want you to look at is that this is a legal system because my system is found on a structural default where we had two systems because of the colonial heritage, and we've never really bothered to look at them or to reconcile them appropriately. Why? Because first, we have people, the illiteracy level is high. Second, the people who benefit more from the legal system, the majority who are poor, who are illiterate, live in the provinces which previously was not subject to the colonial administration. So all the court systems, the formal way of writing agreements and whatnot that we have, stay with the central administration. And at the local level, they apply laws that are land rights and land laws that is completely different from the land laws and land rights we apply in the city. So this is an injustice issue that we have systems that are parallel, but one is not recognized in the way that it should, that will allow both the states or the justice partners who want to help those people to support them and recognize the work they are doing at a formal level. That is one. I'll give you another context. I am faced with a case in which we have done very well to transform our justice mechanisms in terms of marital issues, of recognizing people's needs under the marriages law, Mohammedan law, customary traditional law, civil law, that's the registrar of marriages, and then church law. So we have all these laws. So there is one case of the Mohammedan law, which is recognized now, written in the act, a law, so somebody talking about legislation, not necessarily being the prime to move justice. They wanted to get a divorce. The lady submits to a system that has been given legal validity to dissolve that union. They dissolve the union. The gentleman gets his freedom. He brought the divorce. He's walking free. The court there, the Sharia court, Mohammedan court, avows that he pays her money, gives her the vehicle because he's having the divorce and gets her the home. She gets the paper that she's divorced. The man goes, and she's been fighting for over 4 years to get their money, and so they come back to me.
I'm not sure it's entirely restricted to Sierra Leone.
Yeah, so in this justice context, I am now at odds to think what to do. So probably is to come back to the formal justice system to enforce the law of the Mohammedan, but that area is not quite clear because it was not defined. Why? Because when these systems, this justice needs system arise, the context was not necessarily what the people's needs were. It was the urge to change and to apply what happens elsewhere without following through. So if the project was just law reform, let's change the law and put this. So you change the law and you put it, but without following through. You see, so
Yes, please do.
Look, you asked the question, should there be some kind of a formal recognition by the legal systems of all these different actors, or some of these different actors? I think yes. There needs to be some form of recognition. I mean, I spent a lot of my times gate-crashing systems, where I'm not recognized, and probably they want to wish me away rather than see me there. But the point that I want to make is that despite that, we have been able to make interventions, because it's extremely important to make those interventions. I'm also happy to say that despite all the weaknesses that the legal framework has in my country, and the problems with the judiciary, lack of independence, many times, I mean, Justice Jilani is really an exception. But one thing has happened. For instance, there have been judgments in Pakistan's courts where NGOs and human rights actors have been given locus standi to take up cases of public importance where the question of enforcement of fundamental rights, be they of individuals or of communities, are concerned. It is because of that and a particular provision in our constitution that allows the Supreme Court to take original cognizance of such cases that we have been able to take up many of the cases to court and to draw the attention of the judiciaries. Of course, the results are not always what I can say really delivered or made it easier for us, but at least you can go. So I think some form of legal recognition to give locus standi to human rights groups, paralegals even, those who are really familiar with the conditions and the circumstances of those who are driven to seek justice.
I have two people who want to pick up on this, Nicola and then yourself, Priscilla.
Yes,
We'll do both.
on this question, which is, I think is a very important one. So, again, we're not in any country establishing a justice system from scratch. And, you know, maybe we could ideally imagine a world in which we start from scratch and we imagine the ideal system, but the reality is that we need to work within the limit of what exists. So, point number one, it seems to me that what is important, as I said, I go back to is to provide a continuum of legal and justice services which are different according to the needs, the circumstances, and it can be conciliation, mediation, alternative dispute resolution, formal system when it's needed. Then I think your question becomes relevant. Okay, so, and then what? You know, if someone loses, quote unquote, in one system, can this person use another system? I think this is where I think we need much more work to do on how to make those systems working together in a coherent and harmonious manner. I don't know if it is recognition, formal recognition or not. I see advantages and disadvantages. Again, I think it's very difficult to talk in abstracto. But what is clear is that you need to have a coherent approach. You need to have a holistic approach. You cannot just slice the system and work them in silos, because if not, your response could be worse than even the situation of today, because you could create either duplication, competition, or even contradiction between the various systems.
I'm going to turn, I think everyone wants to come in on this, Priscilla and Walter as well. So picking up on what is being said now, there's also, I know that you've been working a lot with what you call traditional, customary entities or avenues or approaches. But there's also the possibility that sometimes very traditional and very customary systems, or not even systems, but a delivery of justice, can be an injustice, as they may be working on principles that you, as Justice Minister, are bringing your country into new view on. There are also possibilities that in community law, there are those who are more powerful in a community than others, and therefore it's not really based on what you would think of as a national or an overarching system of principles in law. How are you managing all that?
Yes, first of all, what we call principles of law are what is called customary law, because that is their own kind of law. We need these recognized because they are a law in the country and they apply to a huge number of people. What we need to do is to look at it from the approach of the needs in the issue areas that are in those communities. Yes, I understand, Hina, that we can empower people to bring class actions, but that is also going back to the former justice system. And those class actions, I have my own reservations to them, but they are not the needs of the people necessarily. They are what we want sustainable approach. And I believe if we want a sustainable approach, it has to be conceived, not necessarily from what people think is fair to them, but that the availability of institutions that they trust that can deliver services to them. And therefore, to have that option and balance, if they want to be subjected to, they want to submit themselves to their customary practices, they should, that is a justice issue that they should have their rights to do that. Yes, it's a choice. They should have, we should provide the opportunities. Right. And to be able to do that, we have to engage them so that we are able to engage with the system to know the repugnant parts of it, to know the ones that work. A study would help us understand what their needs are and how we can do things that are less costly, more efficient than what we have in the other formal mechanisms.
Walter, you wanted to come in on this?
I want to take the angle of that question of we should take advantage of seeing justice as an inclusive concept. For instance, access in law is the first step in the pathway to seek justice, but may not always result in justice. To achieve justice, we need more than just the law. And I'm saying it's an inclusive concept because we support a network of community defenders.
Yes.
And what we can see is that one of the most important tasks of the community defender is navigating and accessing people law. But whenever we ask them, what is the most important value of your work? They said, how we are helping marginalized people to be part of the system, to be part of the society, to feel that they belong. Mm-hmm. So that's why I would say that we should think of justice not restricting it to law or to the formalities of law. This is important. We need to have it. But to take advantage and seeing the opportunity of being inclusive into how community-based system of paralegals and defenders have an important contribution of connecting marginalized people with society, with the state, and overall services. So that's why I continue pushing that we should maintain the idea of justice is more than just the law. The law is important, accessing the law, but we require more. We require community-based systems to achieve justice.
I think this is very much also what Hina, you were saying before, that it's not only, by the way, marginalized people or poor people, but it's also the sense that sometimes our legal systems seem alienated from all of us except those who can somehow manage it and steer the course that they want through it. This, by the way, I'll come back on it, because for everyone, I think the simplification of administrative hassle between permits and identification and everything else is part of what you started out with, shall we say, a sound regulatory, a decent regulatory framework, which we don't always have, and alienates all of us, feeling that we are unjustly treated. But we can come back on this.
I just wanted to make a comment on something that Priscilla just said. Look, I'm not the run-of-the-mill lawyer that I take class action as a very traditional thing. For me, class action means making visible the problems on the ground through a legal system which is being heard, by people in general through press reports of what the issues are being discussed. So this is where I think the importance of such litigation lies. And it's not just class action suits, it's also individual cases that you can take to court. And there are journalists watching, the public at large now through the media is also looking at the issues. So they begin to understand where the changes need to be made.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back. I think Asako wanted to come in also on this. And perhaps also we can just move a very little bit to a peripheral question on this. You all started by saying that we all started from the very beginning of this afternoon that governments are going to be primarily the ones to deliver on the SDG, right, 16.3. Primarily the reports are going to be about what government is actually delivering on it. So I want to ask you if they're really stepping up to it. I know that you may have some comments on this also, Walter, and certainly, Asako, you know what they're actually doing. Can you tell us?
Okay, I will come back to that, but on the point of inclusivity, I would like to highlight the further marginalized people, for instance, in a protracted crisis, displacement happens, and there are at least 70 million people forcibly displaced. And then in most of the protracted displacement, housing, land, and property issue is a very big issue for them. And then the access to the basic services, all that it relates to their vulnerability. And then to secure access to their rights and entitlement is one of the big areas that as we work between the humanitarian and development partners. And then this also relates to the SDG goals, on the leave no one behind concept. There are huge gap, the justice gap as we found in this report, and then to address from the most vulnerable, the farthest behind is also the approach that we need to take, and then to have identify the hotspots of the vulnerabilities where there is the weakness and so forth is very much important. And also the related the SDG goals to goal 16 is the one on inequality. The inequality is one of the huge now the threat to the society's stability, and the UNDP's signature human development report this year is looking at the state of the inequality worldwide, and for that, and then also to come up with the specific targeted approach to address the most vulnerable, and then with data, and then identification of hotspot, who are the category of the people who requires the justice or the social protection or legal protection and so forth, and then to approach from there too. These approaches through this kind of leave no one behind concept would become more and more important, and to use the science and data metrics to address this would push up the some of the baseline, and then to have less inequality in the society, which will be critical. I mean, the marginalization, or the inequality, it was became identified as a source of conflict, and then the more work on social cohesion, preventing the radicalization through the community work. All that is connected together. And the work on the preventive side, this is also a focus in this report, is going to be a very important one. In the Pathway for Peace, another signature report on the prevention side of the conflict, which UN and World Bank had produced last year, had actually worked out the economy of investing in prevention. Through investing in prevention, we can save up to 5 billion to 60 billion worth of our efforts elsewhere. So these are all the good reports, and the learnings should be put together as we prepare ourselves for 2030. We need definitely to accelerate our endeavors, and this HLPF, review, assess, and then highlight where could be the accelerator point, where is dragging behind, all that assessment, and then for that hopefully that we can continue on accelerating by 2030 to achieve the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Asako. And that brings us, this will be our last round, and I'm going to ask each of you, let's not be blinded by the complexity we feel that perhaps this will take to deliver justice for all in 12 years. Obviously, the reports for the SDG achievements, 16.3, are going to be done by governments. But it's very, very clear that that's not enough. And I don't know to what extent, and here it's groups like, intergovernmental organizations like UNDP and OECD, which can play a vital role, that it's absolutely clear that alone governments are not going to be able to show within 12 years that everything has been done to achieve justice for all. It's going to take a lot of input from all the kinds of work that you have been doing, Hina, and yourself, Walter. So I want to ask you each, as a concluding round before we finish, if you had to choose one or two really top-level priorities that you wanted to see reported back, stressed, worked on in your countries, that would deliver justice for all, and that would be an integral part of all this reporting mechanism that's coming into all the high-level meetings that are going to be taking place, where would you put an emphasis? Who would like to start out? And we just do a minute or two for each of us before we conclude. Hina.
I'll be very brief. I don't think there is a priority here. Mm-hmm. I think several things to happen parallel to each other for the system really to evolve into something that we are hoping and aspiring towards. So I don't have a priority. Of course, laws have to be corrected, institutions have to be given capacity, independence of certain institutions has to be ensured, and more than anything else, people's participation in the creation of that system is crucial. So everything that the government does must be so well debated. It may take a little time, but at the same time, people's own views must come forward. So it's not just the justice sector practitioners or defenders, apart from government and other state institutions that have to be involved. Journalists have to be involved. All avenues of information giving and gathering should be involved so that the public becomes informed of what the government has in mind and is able then to participate fully in turning it around if they feel that that's not going to be enough. So that's the essence of participatory democracy, and those are the tools that we want to kind of bring into action for any kind of justice sector reforms.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much. Who would like? Walter.
Yeah, in a people-centered approach, people can still be very passive subjects.
Yes.
So I think that in addition to being people-centered, we should aim to be people-led accountability. And with this, I mean that, yeah, we need to work with official structures, but we need to facilitate, create conditions so in each country, those that are left behind, the most marginalized, are actually active participants, active subjects, rather than the passive that is waiting to be found to receive services. With this passivity, we're not going to resolve the issue of inclusion. So I would say that the key factor will be facilitating people-led accountability for justice for all.
Do you want to add anything to this, Cesar?
Yes, I would love that, Walter. I totally second your point. People-led, to make the people agent of change, transformation will be the key in achieving SDGs. Unless we capacitate, empower people or to be able to guide their own life, destiny, that we won't make the drastic change. And then in connection to that, I would like to emphasize that we need to invest far more on the prevention side and conflict and violence for justice for all. The biggest the risk for the justice for all is the conflict and violence, and if we don't invest more to address the drivers of this. The study said that more than half of the world poor will be living in conflict-affected context by 2030. That's quite daunting, and then this will be a critical element in addressing justice for all. Thank you.
As the government responsible for all of you, you're going to have to report on these things. How do you see it?
Let me just speak to my context. First, I think there must be, as a representative of government, there must be a political will. There must be a political will in every state to align with the cause for access to justice for all. And that is what we are doing in my country. In fact, on Thursday, there is a state opening address to our parliament in which we have clearly spelled out what our ambition is to deal with the justice, access to justice framework in our country that is going to be presented to the parliament based on this report. Specifically, I would aim as Justice Minister for my country, because I want you to permit me to be specific in this context, because what we have to do is huge. I want to use what I have on the ground. We are a country, a people, a government that is resilient. If there is the political will, we can move things. Our platform is education for development and human capital development. So that puts people at the center of the justice system of what we want to do. So we aim, because of what we have, the already structural imbalance in the justice system that we have, the informal and the formal, we want to study the formal system so that we can have a parallel system that people can have access to choose which form of justice they want that best serves their needs. Second, we would hope to empower women in that informal justice system, because at the moment it's very patrilineal. Why? Because most in those communities, the women take the brunt of the work, the farming, the child raising, the schooling. So if you get them on top of the justice needs in mediation communities, I think you are empowering the people. And of course, we need justice partners for the education that they need in terms of those general applicable laws that the country provides by way of legislation that are applicable to them, that they are not informed on. So that's where we can have our paralegals and whatnot to help them apply. And what I hope to get done finally is a continuing justice dialogue to understand their needs. In fact, we have embarked on that study. My government reserved 21% of our budget for our education and development. We started it 4 months after we took office. We didn't have any support from international community. So we showed our commitments to that by starting. And then our partners kicked in because they saw that we were serious and we mean business. So therefore, for this, the same is the cause for our justice desire and ambition. If we cannot have that system that puts people at the center, have this dialogue with all our stakeholders, but primarily and predominantly the people in those communities, whether they are land rights, those who live in mining communities, whether they are grazing rights, those who live in the agriculture, because we are now taking big projects. So we want to look at commercial lands. We must have legislation. Is it formal, in the formal system, or in the informal system that protects them? So these are some of the things that I hope to achieve, that we can make justice. Even if we do not achieve it by 2030 to be accessible, there will be a transformational understanding of what our justice needs are as we move towards that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. So we began our conversation with you, Nicola, and we'll finish
Thank you.
with you.
Thank you, Maria. So first, on this question of the 2030 SDGs, for those who are interested, stay tuned, because on 20 May, we're going to issue the third report, but the first one which will disaggregate by country on how OECD countries are doing in terms of meeting the SDG targets. I was able to see the preview of the report. Let's say that it is a mixed picture. And we're talking about the OECD countries. So, but this aside, I think two main points. The first one, very much in the same vein of what Walter, Hina, and others have said. So if we put the people at the center, we need to know and to understand what are their needs. So we have now the white paper, which we can use and base ourselves. It is clear that there is a mismatch between what are the needs of the people and the legal services that are provided. And to address this mismatch, you may not have to have super huge, costly reforms. So, let's look at it from a pragmatic angle. Let's, not focus on big schemes, but let's try to address in a systemic way the various mismatch and see how we can address them. And the response may be different from one country to the other, by the way. The second point, which is also what the white paper is trying to make, is, and going back to you, Minister, so you can bring it back to Sierra Leone, the white paper also seeks to show that investing in justice is a good investment, that the returns are very, very high. Again, if we are talking about 0.5 to 3% of GDPs, if we are talking also about the issues that Walter was talking about, the fact that justice not only needs to be done, but have to be seen as being done, which is an important point of social cohesion, trust in institutions, those intangible costs. I mean, spending on justice is a very, very good investment with a high ratio of return.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I think we're going to throw everything we've said back to you for the next days of discussion, because this is just setting a little bit the parameters, the questions, the issues. And I thank you all for having listened so intently. And above all, can you give a big hand, please, to our panelists? Thank you.
Maria, thank you, and other panelists as well, for a stimulating and spirited discussion. And you have indeed framed the conference in a way that will be most productive going forward. That concludes the substantive portion of our programming today. As you exit the theater, please stop by the Task Force on Justice booth to pick up a copy of the report, pose for photos to post on social media, and meet the report authors. As you make your way to the welcome reception in the lobby, we invite you to explore the array of booths in the Expo Village to meet exciting, innovative projects and organizations solving the justice gap. Tomorrow morning, we'll open the doors at 8 a.m. for coffee and more opportunity to visit with the Expo organizations before we begin our program at 9 a.m. sharp back here in the theater. Thank you all for making this trip to The Hague, and we look forward to a stimulating and productive week together. Thank you.